They would walk around with machetes, axes, hidden in their bags, and some of them carrying pistols. And they would openly fight on campus, and they would inflict injuries on themselves.
This wasn't what he had expected from university. Sowore had arrived in Lagos excited and idealistic. He had grown up in a rural village in Ondo State, the son of a poor but educated family. His father was a teacher and a fisherman, and his childhood was happy initially.
I was living the best life possible. It was natural environment. The lake beside where I grew up was a freshwater lake. Everything we wanted, everything we needed was available. Was within grasping, within reach.
So what was the turning point for you? Like, what made you decide to go all the way from Ondo State to Lagos?
My turning point was when my village was invaded by the Nigerian police force because there was a fracas in the market. Police went out, came back in the night, raided the village, beat up people, pillaged the village, and I was held up in our little room in our house, scared to death that they will come in our house and probably do something horrible to.
How old were you at this point, and what year exactly was this?
I was 10 years old. It was Christmas of 1980. It was a turning point. I just sat there frozen, scared, and said to myself in silence that if I grow up, I will fight against this kind of injustice.
So that was the turning point for you?
It was. It was a little. I was very traumatized. That stayed with me in my memory for life.
From Ondo State, you decided to go to the University of Lagos, which was a very prestigious university at that time and still is,
Yes.
by so many standards. So what were you expecting to achieve? What were your goals with the University of Lagos?
I was excited. University of Lagos, it was a place for socialization. It was a place for education. It was cosmopolitan. It had everything, all the trappings of someone who was adventurous. So I went there hoping to just be this different person.
When Sowore got to the university, it wasn't easy for him to fit in. For a start, things were so expensive. UNILAG students have a reputation for being flashy and for putting down serious cash at parties. Sowore couldn't afford all that, and it wasn't really his scene anyway. Instead, he involved himself with the student union. These were eventful times. Students were an important part of a growing anti-government protest movement.
I was exposed very quickly to all the activists that used to come on campus, on the ground, and we plotted to fight against military rule. So we started organizing from that period on.
Sowore rose through the ranks of the student union, and as the demonstrations against the government intensified, so did the problem of the confraternities. Sowore says the government was actually using the confraternity groups to attack student protesters. I've heard this sort of allegations elsewhere, although they're very hard to prove.
It was towards the end, my third and last year that they became very pronounced and very bold, and then we experienced a lot of violence. One of them brought a double-barreled gun to campus and was arrested. But beyond that, it was just way of life that, they didn't go to class, they drank. Some of them we had been expelled, but they hung around because there was a lot of cases of rapes, sexual harassment, and assault associated with these gangs. That was huge.
So you became the president of the student union group, and at that time in the 90s, that union was a big thing.
That's correct.
How did you use this now faced with this problem of, activities of cultists on campus?
If you're a student union president of any student union, you're like the head of state of a nation. So you have your own sources, you have security reports. And some of them try to reach out. They don't have problems with the student union because we're the dominant force on campus in those days. Did
you have the materials, the numbers, to fight them when situations turned violent?
I think the numbers boosted our courage. We always feel like we're all united in fighting these guys, and they were in the minority, we were in the majority. So we defeated them with just raw courage.
Sowore and the union took on the confraternities. They would expose them, protest against them, and they would use their numbers to intimidate them too. Sometimes there would be physical fights. Sowore was making a lot of noise and it was making him a target. Other student union members had been killed by confraternities at other universities. The threat was real.
It all played out at the point I almost lost my life.
Can you tell us about that day you were finally attacked?
And it was March 1994. It was my last day as a student union president, 1994. I was in the student union building when I got information that some guys had taken over our rally ground. We used to call it Freedom Square. That's where we hold rallies on a weekly basis. And they said, why don't we go check the place out? This is weird and strange. So I walked to this place, was the new hall area in the middle of campus, and sat across from the rally ground and saw different groups of guys. This time around, they were wearing their insignia. They had red hats. Most of them were wearing black on black, and I knew something was amiss. Some of them I knew, and some of them wore face hats, dark glasses. And I noticed the moment I stood up to move, they started moving in different directions to cut me off. So I started walking briskly. I told this guy, I said, it looks like we have to mobilize students. This is going to be rough. As I was walking, two of them came up to me and said, are you Mr. Sowore? Of course, I said, yes. I knew one of them. I said, but you know me. And then they had a gun against my waist. And they said, you have to come with us. And I said, where? They had me by my waist, my pants, and kept dragging me. And some students would, come and they'll run away when they see the gun. And so at the point, I was able to break loose and I ran into one of the hostels and they ran after me. So it turns out that they were all over the place. They had sat, in some of the bars on campus, bukateria, cafeteria, eating and drinking. And all of them were just running after me. And then when we got to a place, they pinned me to the wall and injected me with an unknown substance. And some of them left at that point. Maybe they thought I would die. And as I turned around, I saw one of them who was my classmate, and I shouted his name. I was like, hey, how could you be part of this? My classmate, we're supposed to start exams the next day. So he then started telling them, like, oh, Sowore knows me now. I'm in trouble, so please let me get him out of here. And he helped drag me out of that hallway onto the outside. And when I got outside, a different group of these guys pounced on me, and then one of them stabbed me in the head and left the knife there. And then they stripped me naked and started dragging me on campus, and students were just like, people were throwing stuff at them.
And all this lasted for how long?
It probably lasted for about 2 hours or so. And it took me back to the student rally ground and took me to the podium, which is about 1 story high, and asked me to renounce, to apologize to them and renounce my student union presidency. It was all confusing because at that point I didn't even know what was going on, and because my whole body was bloodied, blood was gushing out of my whole body. I was naked.
What about the university security at that point?
We couldn't find anybody around at that point.
So you were at this podium, bloodied, naked,
yes,
pulling you from left to right,
Yes.
What exactly was going through your mind?
I wasn't afraid. I don't know why, but I kept telling the students, I know this might be my last. But don't worry, I've done my best and carry on the struggle. So that was what I was saying, even as they were beating me and asking me to renounce and say, okay, and apologize to them. But as that was going on, some 2,000 students, you can ask me who is counting, but that would be my guess, were coming from the gate. So I jumped from this podium onto the ground and fell on the back of my leg, my heel, and almost broke my back. So at that point, the students just carried me. And as we were going towards the university head center, another set of students were coming, almost about the same number. But the two groups, they didn't know who was who, so there was a clash again. The group that rescued me were clashing with the groups that were coming to rescue me. For another almost 15 minutes, people that were just throwing missiles at each other, saying, leave Sowore alone. And so it took a while for them to understand that, they were doing the same thing.
Aside from you, was any other person hurt in this attack?
I wouldn't know. At this point, I was losing my mind. I was seeing less and less because there was a lot of blood coming out. So they took me to the University Health Center. Got there, nobody was there except the ambulance driver. And there were no doctors, no nurses. Everybody had left. But the ambulance driver curiously said, well, they asked me to wait here in case anybody comes in and needs help. So that was how I was taken to the Lagos University Teaching Hospital, LUTH. And as I was entering the place, I just passed out. I didn't wake up until the next day after surgeries had been done on my head. I'd received treatment, but when I woke up, I couldn't recognize myself. When I went to the mirror, my whole body was swollen. It was crazy.
Did you ever find out exactly what the substance was that was injected into you?
There were a lot of rumors, but when I went to the U.S., I did a test for lead. I did HIV tests, all kinds of tests just to be sure, but nothing was found in my bloodstream.
How long did it take for you to recover from that incident?
So I was there for 5 days. What I heard later was that the next day, the students on campus went on a statewide protest in Lagos State and visited the homes of some of these court leaders and their parents. And there was a lot of fracas because they were upset.
The university was thrown into chaos. Students fought against confraternity members and the police got involved. The campus was closed down and Sowore left the hospital and went into hiding.
I don't think we came back to school until maybe 4 or 5 months later. But when the school reopened, we went and organized ourselves. When they reopened the school, I slipped into the school, even though I was still wanted at that time. When the students saw me, they got excited. Went on the protest. We did exam boycott the next day. And eventually, by 12 noon the next day, the school authorities issued a statement claiming that we've been granted amnesty, which is amnesty for the student leaders and amnesty for the court guys.
So you were allowed back in to write your exams?
Well, of course, they had no option. I was popular in those days as a student leader, and when most students thought I died. So the excitement itself to see that I had the courage to come back to school as a leader, they were willing to do anything for me to finish my studies. So I remember my last paper, there were over 100 students just standing outside of the exam hall, ensuring that nothing happened to me while I wrote my last paper.
And that your course mate, you said you recognized at the day of the attack as one of the people who attacked you. Did you ever get the opportunity to see him again?
Of course. He didn't say a word. He was in class.
Did you say anything to him?
I didn't say anything to him. Because they were enjoying massive protection from the system. So we sat in the last exam together. He was in an exam. We just would take glances at each other. And I think he was pretty scared of what could happen. But we didn't go back to school with the intention of exacting, vengeance. We just wanted to focus on graduating and keep the student union government going.
And so what sort of impression did this leave, in you? What did this make you want to do next?
All my plans for the future was just shattered. But it strengthened me to want to fight stronger and, for a better society where this would not happen to other people. But I tell you today, it feels like things are still the same.
And things stay the same in terms of what university courts have evolved to look like today?
University courts have evolved into street gangs as we have it today. It's even worse. I don't know if you monitor what happens on our streets. Campuses generally are quieter in terms of violence, but the streets have taken over. And much later, which is the most recent, is that they spread beyond the campuses, even into the diaspora, to the point that in Canada and in Italy, some of these cult groups or gangs have become outlets for drug distribution and drug the drug trade. Right now, I even heard that students in primary schools, students in secondary schools are joining cult gangs. It's scary for the future of this country.